Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya perwakilan dari kelompok 6 ingin mempresentasikan hasil kerja kelompok kami. Ada pula materi kelompok kami yaitu Characteristic of Effective EFL Instruction in Iran Context. Ada pula member dari grup kami yaitu Dwi Sintia Gandhi, yaitu saya sendiri, Arya Putra Irawan, Andi Muhammad Silan Zalilah, dan Muhammad Safaat. For the first is introduction. With the spread of globalization, language learning is gaining more and more prominence daily. As the movement from traditional methods of education to modern methods take place, developing countries like Iran find themselves trapped between these two extremes. The Iranian government, on the one hand, advocates conservative policies in all fields of its administration, including the Ministry of Education. On the other hand, with the arrival of mass media, the satellite and internet, the Iranian public is also exposed to new and modern methods of thinking and learning. This discrepancy can be clearly noticed in the English lesson curriculum designed by the Ministry of Education and the English course offered by private language schools outside school time. Nowadays, with the desertification of the language learners, with the grammar translation style classes offered at their schools, most are referring to private institutions for quality language learning. For the second is review of literature. Change in language teaching methods during the past century are directly influenced by the needs that arise from the learners. When modern language entered the education system in European countries, they were taught using the same methods that were used to teach Latin. There is memorizing lists of vocabulary, strict grammatical rules, and sentence for translation. By the end of the 18th century, this method became commonplace in all higher education institutes as the standard way of learning of foreign language and was later referred to as grammar translation method. Some of the main principles of this method were: 1. The main purpose of learning a foreign language is learning about its literature. 2. Reading, writing, and explicit grammar of primary importance. 3. Accuracy is of extreme importance. 4. The student's native language is used in the classroom. And last, lessons are teacher-centered. After a couple of decades, with the presence of the word wars in Europe during the beginning of the 20th century, a new need of language learning emerged. The army soldiers, which were sent to Europe to battle it out with the Germans and their allies, were required to learn the language for spoken purposes. The army soldiers were required to gain spoken proficiency rather than written proficiency, which was prevalent in the grammar translation method. This led to a new approach which emphasizes the spoken aspect of a language rather than the written aspect. The approach adopted by the Army later developed into a new approach called the audio-language method. Some of the main principles of this approach is 1. Voice language learning is a mechanical process and can be achieved through continuous repetition of structures and conversations. 2. Spoken form of the language outweighs written form in importance. 3. The student's native language is forbidden in the classrooms. 4. There is no tolerance of errors. And the last is lessons are teacher-centered.
Method. Research question. The research had the following research question in mind. What are the characteristics of an effective teacher according to student? What item has the most priority in each category of the questionnaire according to student? Participant. The participants of this research were 42, 3 male and 9 female students who are currently studying English in level ranging from pre-intermediate to advanced at Promain Language School in Tabriz, Iran. Instrument. The instrument used was a 58-item questionnaire which was developed to through meticulous reading of literature. The language school's criteria for teacher observation and the research own experience of successful teaching. This 58-item questionnaire was divided into 8 sections. Procedure. Language learners were asked to rate each item according to its importance. The options available for selection were as follows: not important at all, somehow important, important, and very important. Result. The first section of the questionnaire was regarding the personal qualities of an effective teacher as can be seen from the table above. The gender, age, appearance, and loudness of the teacher is of very little importance to the majority of the students. However, 70.80% of the students thought that an effective teacher should be interested in his or her job and should show a sense of responsibility towards it. Also, there was a consensus among students that the teacher should be lively and active and should be punctual in his or her presence in the class and in returning the student papers. What is more interesting is that a vast number of the students numbered the item, having interest in his or her job and feeling responsible for teaching as their first priority in terms of the importance of the item in comparison to the other 9 items in the personal quality category. In Table 2, the teacher's command of the foreign language is taken to consideration. From this table is that majority of the students thought that all the items in this category are important. In fact, none of the students marked the not important option. In contrast, 83.33% of the students marked accuracy of the teacher vocabulary as very important. 52.38% of the students who mark this item also mark it as their first priority in comparison to the other items under this category. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Andi Muhammad Silan Sarilap from English Education Class D, and in this video I would like to continue my friend explanation. Table 2. Comment in English. In Table 2, teacher's comment of the foreign language is taken into consideration. From this table is that the majority of all of the students through all the items in this category are of importance. In fact, no one the student marked the not important option. In contrast, 83.33% of the student marked accuracy of teacher vocabulary as the very important. 52.38% of the students who marked this item also marked it as their first priority in comparison to the other items under this category. Table 3. Teaching methodology. Finally, students favor teacher who provide detailed explanation before and during the reading and listening task. 52.38% of the students mark this item as an important feature of the successful teacher regarding the priority of the items. The first item, that is using appropriate teaching technique, was marked by 18 of participants, 42.85% as the first priority in comparison to the other 12 items in this category. Table 4. Evaluation method. Table 4 is regarding the evaluation method applied to the classroom. The majority of the students mark both written and oral form of evaluation as either important or very important, which equates the importance of continuous evaluation in the student preparation in comparing written and oral form of evaluation. Students show a preference toward oral quiz, with 80.95% of participants marking oral form of evaluation as their first priority. Table 5. Amount of teacher emphasis on different skill. The following table show the student preparation towards different skill in language class. The majority of students have marked all language skill as important or very important. 73.89% of the students thought that emphasizing speaking is very important. These pretext show that the majority of the students prefer teachers to work on their oral skill in comparison to other skill. This is reflected in the priority the student gave to teacher who focus on speaking too. More than half of participants, or 52.38%, marked this item as their first priority. Moreover, only 2.38% of students marked the not important at all option for emphasizing grammar, which show the modest importance students attribute to grammar.
In the free writing section, one of the students mentioned that knowledge of the subject matter is not adequate for teacher to be considered successful, and he or she must also be able to communicate that knowledge successfully to his or her students. This opinion is also reflected in the importance allocated to the teacher's ability in transferring ideas and knowledge to the students. 45.23% marked this item as very important, and 40.47% marked this as important. The majority of students have marked the item listed above as important or very important. The last table is titled Class Management or Institutes Programs. According to this table, using the class time wisely, in other words, Not wasting the class time is largely important to the majority of the students. 73.40.87 have marked this is as very important, and another 23.80% have marked it as important. Another substantial figure is regarding the importance students placed on maintaining order in the class. Over 80% of the students have marked this item as either important or very important. Okay, the conclusion. The investigation established what the students felt were the attributes or effective EFL lecturers. According to this research, some of the most important features of an effective and successful EFL teacher are having interest in his or her job, having a sense of responsibility towards his or her job, being enthusiastic and lively, being self-confident, being punctual, encouraging students to use the target language at all times, providing explicit grammar correction, providing detailed explanation during reading and listening tasks, emphasizing frequent oral quizzes, emphasizing all skills, especially speaking, having knowledge of subject matter, having the ability to communicate ideas effectively, having the ability to answer the students' questions, having respect for students, being kind and friendly, encouraging participation, creating motivation in students, helping to increase the students' self-confidence during learning, taking students' feedback about the class into consideration, using the class time wisely, maintaining class order. Okay, maybe that's all for me. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.